Hey guys, this is Rick. So, Bitcoin has seen a number of forks, and there are two main forks at this time, called BTC and BCH. And there's a lot of animosity in between these communities that resulted. Some are saying that they're the true Scotsman, others that they're the true Scotsman, and they're the People's Front of Judea, and we're the Judean People's Front, and so on. As usual, the truth is somewhere in between all of these extremes. Let's try to straighten out the concepts a little. So let's take a look at what happened when Bitcoin split into two variants in August of 2017, Bitcoin-BTC and Bitcoin-BCH. As it's called in technical lingo, it forked into two variants, and even this simple statement is controversial among the most religious members of one of these two resulting communities. On the Bitcoin BTC side, the worldview is something like this: that you have a BTC before the split, a Bitcoin before the split, pre-fork, a straight nice line to Bitcoin BTC today, and somewhere along the line Bitcoin BCH, or rather just BCH, split off and did its own completely irrelevant thing to the mainline development. And what happened at this very time was that the Bitcoin BTC path upgraded with something called segregated witness. I swear to Odin, whoever comes up with these names needs to learn marketing 101. As in, segregated witness is not a positive term. It screams of racial bigotry. It's not something you want to have as a brand anywhere else. Yeah, never mind, that was a sidetrack. The segregated witness upgrade, now I can't even say it without getting angry, happened here, and the Bitcoin's cash split off in a so-called hard fork there, whereas the segregated witness upgrade was with a so-called soft fork. And so the Bitcoin BTC community is arguing that they own the legacy, they are the main line on strictly technical merits, from a strictly technical perspective. They're claiming the entire Bitcoin legacy is theirs, since a very old piece of software, Bitcoin software, will, as they call it, sync to the new chain, meaning that old software will still run with BTC as today, thereby completely ignoring the fact that this segregated witness upgrade was deliberately coded to confuse old software into thinking it still works when it's actually not showing accurate data. This is the definition of a soft fork, if you should come across that term, that old software still works or still runs, but doesn't necessarily show anything accurate. So the Bitcoin BTC camp is deliberately coded the change to confuse old software into still running, to have the argument that old software is still running as a claim to the Bitcoin's legacy. Meanwhile, the Bitcoin BCH camp says things from the exact opposite angle, as in BTC, Bitcoin pre-fork, went straight ahead and then completely split off with this introduced segregated witness, whereas Bitcoin Cash continued the Bitcoin legacy into Bitcoin BCH. This is a strictly economical perspective on Bitcoin, as in it maintains mostly the same economic parameters: low or no fees, an effective peer-to-peer payment system, an almost instant transaction, a reliable instant transaction even. And you could argue that regarding it in economic terms, it's not entirely without merit, since it's a technical invention solving an economic problem. But then again, this perspective sometimes can be justly criticized for placing a very, very high degree of infallibility into the unknown and now completely disappeared creator of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, who, as we've seen, had some rather nasty bugs in the software, frankly. And as usual, the objective truth is probably best stated to be somewhere in between these two extremes. Something like this, that you had a Bitcoin with a ticker BTC pre-fork before the split. There were two changes that were pretty much at the same time. They both happened in August of 2017. There was a little bit of time difference, that doesn't matter. The Bitcoin BTC today had the change introducing segregated witness. Bitcoin BCH had a change introducing bigger blocks. So if you're looking at this with a little bit of reason, you're seeing a social disconnect between two camps in a community, and the community split two ways over these disagreements. And who was the main line then? Who's the main Bitcoin here? Well, to be frank, that's hard to measure. You can argue that it's by hash rate, by price, by maintained parameters, by activity. Rather, I'd like to look at how the split came to pass in the first place. How did it take place? You had a creator of Bitcoin, known only by the name Satoshi Nakamoto, who sometime in 2010 passed the keys to the castle to Gavin Andresen, who was then the main developer, the chief developer of Bitcoin. Sometime around 2012, I believe, Gavin Andresen passed the keys again to Vladimir van der Laan, who added 4 more people to the team who could commit code into GitHub, into the Bitcoin core repository. And as frequently happens, the third generation didn't share all the values of the first generation of maintainers. Usually you can pass on values from a first to a second generation, but when you're passing on from second to a third, and particularly if this happens in too quick a succession, then you're getting a value gap in between the first and the third generation. And this is what happened here. So these third generation maintainers, most of them, or many of them, formed a company called Blockstream, which I've been detailing in another video, how they tried to be a horizontal and a vertical at the same time and therefore failed with their business plan. Their business plan required something called this segregated witness. They wanted 95% of the community to go along with it in order for this feature to activate on the network. Didn't get nearly anywhere near that. I think the top was between 30 and I think I'm pushing it if I'm saying 40. It doesn't matter whether it was 25, 30 or 40. It wasn't anywhere close to 95. That's the key thing here. And so the rest of the community didn't want anything of this segregated witness code. They didn't want this feature. It was destroying Bitcoin, blah, 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 blah. Instead, we just wanted bigger capacity in the form of bigger blocks. This was what the rest of the community, non-Blockstream community, wanted. And Blockstream blankly refused, and so the entire situation was at an impasse for years. For years. It finally came to something called the New York Agreement. And I'm skipping the Hong Kong Agreement here, which has its own set of problems. The New York Agreement was basically that everybody gets what they want. The Blockstream part get their segregated witness. The rest of the community gets their bigger blocks. Well, everybody gets what they want, sort of. Because in this agreement, it was written that segregated witness would activate 3 months ahead of the bigger blocks. And remember now that segregated witness was the Bitcoin-BTC community thing, bigger blocks was the Bitcoin-BCH community thing. And segregated witness, the Bitcoin-BTC side, would activate 3 months ahead of the Bitcoin-BTC side, which anybody aware of game theory knows is a horrible idea. Also, as part of this plan, and this is largely forgotten today, but I would argue that this was a key aspect of what happened. The maintainer's key would also pass from Vladimir van der Laan to Jeff Garzik. So you would have another generational shift, which is essentially a vote of no confidence in these maintainers. The agreement reached the prerequisite 80%. The bar for this was set lower than the 95% set for segregated witness, and so was set to execute. So one team is getting everything they want, and then much later the other team is supposed to get what they want. So in this game of give and take, first one camp gets everything, and then they're supposed to give the other team everything they want just based on honor, having made a promise, I don't know. In any case, there was this uneasiness that what if the second part isn't upheld once segregated witness has activated? So a person named Amaury Séchet created an insurance policy. He created a new Bitcoin version. It was called Bitcoin-ABC at the time, later called Bitcoin Cash. That if after segregated witness activates, if the second part with bigger blocks and handover of the keys to Jeff Garzik isn't carried through, if this isn't carried through, then the community still has the option of continuing without that first part it didn't want. The blockstream part of segregated witness, there would still be the option of continuing with that, since Bitcoin-ABC would split off from this Bitcoin chain just before this change took place. And as we know today, that's also exactly what happened. This insurance policy turned out to be needed. The blockstream camp caused so much noise and disruption that it became impossible to proceed to the second stage of what was in the New York Agreement. And that's today why we have two versions of Bitcoin and not one, because one camp got everything they wanted and then refused to honor their part of the deal, the New York Agreement. This is why today we have the pre-fork Bitcoin, which goes up to here, where the New York Agreement was supposed to activate. Segregated witness activated into what is today the Bitcoin-BTC fork, which is not the pre-fork BTC. They happen to share the ticker. They are not the same thing, as I've shown here. And we have the bigger blocks change, which turned into Bitcoin-BCH, Bitcoin Cash. You'll notice that through this presentation I've been using the terms Bitcoin-BTC and Bitcoin-BCH. Even the naming of these two currencies are in controversy, because whenever you hear Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Core or Bitcoin Legacy, there will always be actors that pop up and cause disruption and noise as to what is being said. I'm using Bitcoin-BTC and Bitcoin-BCH reasonably consistently because A, it is unambiguous what I'm referring to. B, these are both variants of Bitcoin. That is undisputable because they both go back to the Genesis block. And this way of writing also has some precedent in the current monetary policy, seeing, for example, how the dollar can be clarified as dollar USD or dollar Canadian, depending on what specific dollar you're talking about, even though it's completely acceptable in everyday terms to talk about just dollars. And that is basically the view of Bitcoin's two versions, Bitcoin-BCH and Bitcoin-BTC, and how they came to be.